Chapter 52. Jacqueline covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide open in horror, not daring to blink as she looked at the ghost wandering in the cemetery. Beep beep beep. The alarm clock from the phone had attracted the rotten flesh and blood ghost. Without its eyeballs, it slowly swayed its body towards the source of the sound, but only grabbed air. Just now, Jacqueline had narrowly avoided its outstretched hand. At this moment, she held her breath and carefully bent over to sneak away from the side without disturbing it. Jacqueline still remembered to use her cell phone to contact Siddle, but now if the sound from the phone didn't attract the ghost, she wouldn't even be able to escape from here. She silently took a deep breath, looking around the dark and lonely surroundings, not knowing what was ahead, but still had to cautiously step forward. Perhaps she was very lucky. After walking a few steps, Jacqueline discovered a ray of light that gradually became clearer, and finally she saw a village. Although the sky in the village was dim, it was much better than the dark forest behind. Jacqueline did not dare to stop, and walked in without hesitation, and saw a wooden signboard erected in front of the small road leading to the village. On it was written a word, Freya. In the village, the sky was gloomy, a cold wind blew past, making Jacqueline shiver. She took 2 more steps before she realized that this place was very deserted. Jacqueline felt uneasy in her heart, but when she turned around, she was surprised to find that the path she had taken had disappeared. It seemed that she could only continue moving forward now, and Jacqueline had not walked for long when she suddenly saw a person coming out from behind the house in front. Jacqueline unconsciously took 2 steps back, and after standing firm, she was surprised and delighted to see that the person in front of her was Siddle. She was wearing a white dress, her blonde hair was messy, her face was expressionless, her pale skin was almost transparent, and there were a few barely visible stains on the hem of her dress, making her look a bit shabby. The strange thing was, for some reason, she was covering half of her face with one hand. Siddle's appearance was really creepy, but after enduring so much fear, Jacqueline now only felt relieved. She happily walked over. When she grabbed Siddle's hand, she found that Siddle's hand was cold as if she had just dipped it in water. The person standing in front of her was clearly very familiar, but Jacqueline couldn't help but shiver. She said, "Siddle. Found you." It seemed that the blonde girl's eyes finally focused on Jacqueline. She smiled stiffly, held Jacqueline's hand tightly, and said softly, "Let's go, I know how to leave here." Jacqueline felt an inexplicable uneasiness in her heart. She hesitantly replied, Siddle's hand was still covering the left half of her face. The deep blue eye on her right side looked indifferent. She pulled Jacqueline in a certain direction. After walking a few steps, Jacqueline couldn't help but ask, "Siddle, why do you keep covering the left half of your face?" But when she asked this question, she felt the cold hand holding her hand suddenly tighten. The person leading the way, Siddle, stopped in his tracks, slowly turned his head, and looked down at Jacqueline with calm blue eyes without a ripple. "Doesn't this look weird?" Jacqueline heard her ask. Jacqueline didn't know whether to nod or shake her head for a moment, then looked back at the girl with the strange actions and words in front of her, and the fear in her heart began to flare up. She wanted to break free from Siddle's hand and retreat, but the girl in front of her was surprisingly strong. No matter how hard Jacqueline tried, she couldn't shake her small, white wrist. Then, Jacqueline heard her say softly, "All right then." She let go of her hand, revealing the half of her face that had been covered by her hand all this time. "Indeed, I should have revealed this half of my face too. Does it still look weird now?" Jacqueline looked at the girl in front of her in a daze, and in an instant, she lost the ability to speak. Siddle hid in the closet of a house. She had put her phone on silent mode, but the screen kept flashing. The demon was searching the village for the messages kept coming in. "Siddle, why don't you come out to see me? You don't want to play with me? We're clearly friends, are you planning to abandon me? Hee, I get it, you want to play hide and seek with me, right? I'll definitely catch you." The messages kept coming in, making Siddle uncomfortable. Because she couldn't see without bothering, she put her phone in her pocket, then took out a sahi and placed it in front of her. "What is that?" After exchanging friendly words with Asahi, Siddle finally noticed the messages on her phone. Finally, she opened the closet and went out. When she jumped out of the window, from a distance of more than 10 meters, she saw a very fierce-looking person with a face covered in blood. When it discovered Siddle, it staggered towards her. Siddle ignored it. Asahi had just told her that those things were all the spirits of people who died because of her curse. Asahi said this without feeling guilty, and was even very proud of herself. Humans cannot come into contact with spirits, but spirits can harm or even kill people. Siddle pondered for a long time, not sure if the saber tree she took out from Freddy's dream could work on these spirits. She decided to temporarily ignore this matter. Siddle played tag with the ghost while collecting clues of the game in the village. In the end, she successfully led Ikuta Asahi to discover the truth of the plot. Under the mud of a grave was buried a piece of paper containing deep love for his wife and children. Ikuta Asahi cried bitterly after reading the piece of paper. The whole process Siddle just stood there indifferently watching. To sum up the whole process, roughly. Because he was too busy with work and couldn't always be with his wife and daughter, Ikuta felt ashamed, so he decided to create a game as a compensation gift for his wife and children. Then he created a horror game. Siddle. Great, creating a horror game as a compensation gift, I think only he could think of it. As a result, his wife was unfortunately killed during the production of the game, and his daughter also ran away from home and died outside. Asahi's daughter had always blamed her father for everything, but only now did she discover that this game was a gift from her father. She was completely broken. Siddle looked at Asahi indifferently, crying in pain in front of the tombstone. Her inner self had been freed and saved, but who would save the innocent people she had killed? Siddle turned around and saw Slender Man and Tomoka standing behind her. Who knew when? It seemed that because Asahi's resentment was finally resolved, Tomoka's mind also returned to normal. She still had a calm and happy smile, gently looking at Siddle. Siddle, thank you for breaking Freya's curse. My child, Asahi has always been a stubborn child, and because of that, she has taken the lives of many people. I am very sorry here, the beautiful woman sighed. From now on, her stepfather and I will manage her more closely. Siddle. She widened her big blue eyes, looking at Slender Man in disbelief. It seemed that Tomoka knew what she was thinking. She smiled and replied, You and Ikuta have been separated for many years. There are some things that should still be let go. It's also very good. Speaking of which, I have to thank you, Siddle. Before saying goodbye to Tomoka, Ikuta Asahi's little doll head suddenly raised, calling Siddle back. Wait a minute. Its voice changed from low to the immature voice of a normal little girl. Asahi said, Those who were cursed by me, after dying, all turned into ghosts. You can leave the game now because I myself, the source of the curse, no longer have any resentment. But they're different. Siddle realized something. What you mean is? Asahi softly, saying, I'm very sorry, but they won't disappear with my resentment. I wonder what will happen to this game after losing the root of the curse? Maybe, it will invade your real life. Siddle. She quietly looked down at Asahi, showing a cold, unhappy smile. Asahi hurriedly said, But I can give you an ability. Siddle then felt her left eye starting to heat up, but it immediately calmed down. All right, Asahi said in a childish voice, now my left eye can see things that others can't see. Before Siddle left Tomoka's family, she told her how to leave the game. There were 4 hidden exits around the village. Just follow the flower-lined exit and you can return to reality. You can try keeping the game console, Asahi said. I'll see if I can help you suppress their resentment. After entering the game console screen remained black, and in the end, Siddle left both the doll with her name written on it and the game console to Asahi. The doll was originally an in-game item, and Siddle had never thought of bringing it back to reality. Before leaving, Tomoka hugged Asahi and waved goodbye to Siddle. Slender Man stood silently behind her, waving a tentacle at Siddle. Back in the village, Siddle realized how unpleasant it was to see demons. She looked at the limited images scattered on the ground with an expressionless face, feeling her eyes starting to hurt. A man with a 180-degree neck was lying at her feet. A boy was playing with his head like a leather ball. A woman was using her own intestines as a belt. In the game, you couldn't see the non-harmful sounds, but this also meant that if Siddle's eyes couldn't see souls, she could very well be walking beside a person with a rotten head. Siddle. She didn't feel very well now. She tried many times, after realizing that no matter how she moved, she would come into contact with these strange-shaped ghosts. She decided to give up her left eye. She resigned herself to covering the left half of her face. After not seeing those things, the air seemed to become fresher. Siddle walked while thinking about whether she should put on a blindfold after going out. Then she coincidentally met Jacqueline, who Tomoka promised to bring to her. Jacqueline walked forward with peace of mind and held Siddle's hand, no longer having the same thorny appearance as before. The little girl had appeared, so Siddle also took the opportunity to take Jacqueline's hand, intending to take her away from this place first. But before they could leave, Jacqueline's complexion became worse and worse, and she even called out to Siddle, asking why she was covering her face. Sure enough, covering her face like this still looked very strange. She was tired of raising her hand from just now, so she put it down. Jacqueline looked blankly at the blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl with a calm expression before her. After a while, she couldn't help but say, Are you crazy?" She remembered that she still had to rely on Siddle to get her out, so she forced herself to swallow the second half of her sentence. "If nothing happened, then why did you keep covering your face just now?" Jacqueline complained, "I thought something happened to your face just now, or maybe the person in front of me wasn't you." Siddle turned her head back and continued walking forward without saying a word. However, after she let go of her hand covering her face, her expression became increasingly strange. On the empty road, she could clearly just walk straight, but she stared at the empty places with no objects, muttering, 1, 2, 5, 7. Siddle muttered as she pulled Jacqueline to take a detour. "Jacqueline, what are you doing?" The little girl broke out in a cold sweat from Siddle's strange words and actions. This time, Siddle finally noticed her. She turned back, looked straight into Jacqueline's eyes, and replied seriously, "I'm counting heads." "Jacqueline?" The little girl was both confused and panicked as she turned her head to look at the empty road, thinking. If the little girl had heard wrong, then Siddle had been driven crazy by this game. Even though, there couldn't be a human head there anyway. Siddle took Jacqueline on a detour, but she still quickly found that small flower-filled path. Not long after the two of them set foot on that path, the scene before Siddle's eyes suddenly shattered. After a short period of unconsciousness, Siddle opened her eyes in a corner of the school. Her clothes were clean and tidy. In front of her was Jacqueline with full hair. She and Jacqueline were still standing upright, it was just that the moon was already hanging above the treetops. Jacqueline's face was pale from fear. She glanced at the fork behind Siddle, unconsciously pulling the person beside her back a few steps. The movements had already begun to become practiced. On the contrary, Siddle had no reaction to the branches. Ever since she saw a slender man using tentacles to wash dishes and do housework at Tomoka's house, she had lost all fear of things like branches or tentacles. A gentle and virtuous version of Slender Man made the little fear in Siddle's heart waver and almost collapse. Misfortunes never come singly. But it was Tomoka's forced marriage that left a bit of psychological trauma on Siddle. She glanced at Jacqueline's pale face under the moonlight with a strange gaze, pushed her hand away, and before she could say anything, she saw Jacqueline looking at her in confusion. "I won't tell anyone about this," Jacqueline said, "about you and your secret, and thank you for saving me." "Siddle, nothing." She thought for a moment, "Just don't mess with other people's test papers in the future." Jacqueline's pale little face quickly turned red, and she gritted her teeth and said, "I'm sorry, I will never do such things again in the future." "But you still have to wait." After apologizing, she shyly raised her chin, "Wait for the day I surpass you." "Siddle, all right." As expected of a competitive person, just escaped from Slender Man and stepped out of the death game, not even caring about whether her body was damaged, this person started to worry about her own results. She was silent for a moment, then added, "You don't need to worry about Slender Man anymore, he's probably still in the game, living with Tomoka." Unlike Jacqueline's gradually relaxing expression under the cover of night, Siddle appeared relaxed, but in her heart she knew that this matter was not over yet. She opened her phone and looked at the game icon that suddenly appeared on the screen. Under the moonlight, her eyes were as cold as a frozen lake. The curse had not ended after 7 days. Siddle knew that the spirits in the game could appear around her, but she did not expect them to come so quickly. In the classroom, the teacher was still slowly lecturing. Outside the window, the sunlight was bright but the sky was beautiful. When Siddle opened the book, she saw a boy with gray-white skin and rotten flesh squatting under her desk. He raised his head and looked at her silently. Siddle suddenly stood up and kicked the desk away. The teacher looked at her in surprise. "Siddle, what's wrong with you?" She did not answer but turned to look out of the classroom. A woman with a torn mouth was crawling on the windowsill, drooling and looking at her. The world in the game had already overlapped with the real world.